Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So Istoyo very kindly sent me some of their epoxy resin to try. I've used their UV resin and absolutely love it. I've used their mixer, absolutely love it. So now let's try their epoxy resin and see how it is. Now, this is just their 16-ounce kit, so you get 8 ounces of part A, 8 ounces of part B. They also include an instruction packet, very detailed in showing you how to use it, how to mix it, what temperature, all that good stuff. Let's get on to the project. So what I want to do today is I have got this tray mold that I've not used before. I have these gorgeous, dark and moody kind of scrapbook paper, so I want to use them as well. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up just a little bit of this Istoyo resin, and I want to do, it's going to be like a two-part border for this tray. So I want to add a little bit of this black glass glitter that I have, and I want to add some rose gold foil to it. Now, I'm choosing these colors to kind of complement those the scrapbook paper that I'm using, and kind of just pull out and just go along with that dark and moody kind of vibe that we've got from that. Now, the tray is also, I'm going to use a little bit of burgundy, I'm going to use some black. So we're going to kind of go all in with this one. But the first thing that we're going to do is mix up this resin. Now, the resin is, it's just like their normal, whatever. It's not deep pour. It's not fast cure. It's just normal resin. And it's not super, super, thick. It's a medium viscosity. And I am mixing it properly, guys. And I'm just going to mix it for the full, 3-4 minutes. And I did speed this up, and I'm cutting out a lot of it because you don't need to see it, but there's very, very minimal bubbles, no micro bubbles, just your normal, the bubbles that you're going to get. You know what I mean? So now I am adding in this rose gold foil, and I'm just going to kind of mix it in, break it up into smaller pieces, and then we're going to, after this is all nice and mixed up, I'm going to add in the glass. Now, for the glass, I don't want to add it into the resin because what's going to happen is it's heavy and it's just going to sink to the bottom, and then I'm not going to get kind of an even distribution of it around the edges of this mold that I want. So I'm just going to kind of spoon it in, and I will move it around to kind of break it up a little bit once the resin gets in there. Now, you don't want to do this prior to putting the resin in your mold because you don't want to scratch up your mold. So it's glass and it's sharp, so it may not be sharp as some, but you don't want to take that chance and, get your mold all scratched up. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to add a little bit. I want this to be just a super, super thin layer. I don't want any kind of depth to it at all. It's just basically so that when I put in the burgundy next, I'm not going to lose all of the glass and the foil in with the burgundy. You know what I mean? So really, I'm just adding enough in here just to have it cure all the way around and not have to worry about it pulling away from the edges of my mold. And I am going in with my silicone tool and just kind of breaking up where the glass and the foil are, just to kind of make it look more evenly distributed along the edges. Now, the one thing that I didn't do, and I should have, and hindsight is a wonderful thing, is that I should have taken the time to actually go around those 90-degree edges on both sides, like the outer wall of the mold and that inner wall, because I did get some bubbles that kind of got stuck in those corners, probably from me mixing it up, because the resin really didn't have any bubbles in it, only a handful, but probably from me mixing it with the glass like I'm doing right here, I'm sure I incorporated more bubbles in there. So that's something, and I really didn't think about it because I was going around it so much that, it just kind of slipped my mind that I should have done that. All right, well, I have a lot more resin left over than what I was planning on. So now we're just going to go ahead and do this jar mold too, because why not? Now, for this, I am adding it into the resin because of the way that this mold is. Now, I know I'm doing exactly what I told you not to do and scraping that glass down with it being dry. Do as I say, not as I do kind of situation. I'm just trying to get the glass into the little tip of this lid for this mold, and I'm only going to put just a tiny bit in here because I'm going to go with the same layering of the colors that I am for the tray. So I just want the very top, like, kind of, I guess, handle or whatever of this to get done. And then I'm just going to do a very thin layer around the bottom edge of the actual, like, jar itself, and then be done. Now, it is a little tricky, and I didn't put any kind of glue or anything in here to try and suspend the glass to it. Maybe I should have tried, but I didn't. So it did sink to the bottom on the lid. Obviously, it's going to on here, but this is fine because that's kind of what I was going for as far as this goes. Now, it is tricky to get into this mold and kind of get everything shoved down in where you want it without a lot of resin on the sides that you're going to have to clean up later. I did a really bad job at it, and I did have to take quite a bit of time after this layer dried to kind of get all of the little balls of dried resin off of both sides of the mold. But it's fine. All it did was I just took a little bit of painter's tape and went, kind of just pulled it off of the roll and shoved it down into the mold and then pressed the mold up against itself. And I mean, it did clean up easy enough. You just want to try and make sure that you're not breaking that seal between the mold and the resin as much as possible. I am just trying to work down the glass that keeps wanting to stick on the sides of the mold into the bottom, moving the glass around because when I put it into the resin, it all kind of clumped up in one area, and I don't want it in just one spot on here. I want to still try and, make it as even as possible going all the way around. So I'm just adding it in parts that I still need some more, spreading it out, and then that's it. We're going to let this cure. Now, as that's curing, we have to prepare our paper for going into the resin. So I am just sealing it with some matte Mod Podge, and I am putting not a heavy layer, not a thin layer, kind of like a medium thickish layer of the Mod Podge on here. Now, when I put this on here, I am making sure to go over all of the edges of this, because if you don't seal in those edges, the resin can seep up inside and change your paper colors and all that stuff that we don't want. I am also trying as best as I can. I mean, it dries clear, but I don't want brush strokes on it. Now, obviously, I'm going to get some, but I am making sure that when I do it, like, not right this second, but like as I'm finishing it, I am taking my brush from one end to the other and just kind of doing one line all the way through just to kind of minimize it as much as possible. And then after we're done doing both sides, I'm going to let this dry. Now, I only did one coat on here, and I feel like I did it thick enough that I'm not going to have an issue. If you're doing pictures, like actual real pictures of somebody, or, maybe it's a little bit thicker, this paper is fairly thin, you may want to do several coats of this on there just to make sure that you are sealing it like 100% and you don't have any issues with the resin, getting into it. But I just did the one, and I'm going to let this dry for a full 24 hours. I am making sure that the picture, the part that I want showing, is up top. Now, because I didn't spend any time between the coats, you could see what letting one dry before I did the other side. So I want to make sure that the one picture that I'm actually using is on the top so that when it dries, it's not drying up against that silicone and, the possibility of anything getting stuck to it or just looking weird or anything like that. So kind of keep that in mind when you do something like that. All right, 24 hours later, now it's time for our second layer. So I am using some of my Rolio Burgundy mica powder in here, and this is just going to be another super thin layer just for a pop of color. I realized that the flowers kind of have almost like a purpley look to them, but I thought that this color would complement them very nicely. It's kind of a moody color. It kind of goes along with it. I I didn't like any of my purples for this because they weren't that just kind of deeper, kind of not maybe like a plum-ish color. Like if I had something like that, maybe, but then I didn't want anything to kind of take away from the black either. So I am super, super happy that I chose this color because I mean, this project is, oh, I'm so obsessed. I am so in love with this. Like, you don't even know. All right, so a thin layer around the edges. Again, I don't want it to be thick. I just want it to be enough just to kind of cover that. I want kind of like what I'm going for is I kind of want to give it the illusion, like, when we go along with our paint pens and stuff like that, just a thin layer, it just kind of accents it. That's kind of what I want. The majority of this tray is black. That's how I want it to be. This is just kind of like a accent like you would if you were using a paint pen. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. Now I am taking my time to kind of make sure that there is no air bubbles trapped anywhere, going around those 90-degree angles, all that fun stuff, and hitting it with my heat gun. Now onto the jar mold. Forgot, I almost called it a candle mold. Now for the jar mold. Again, very, very, very thin layer. Because of how thin this is, you want to make sure that you're not pouring too much in. Pour a little bit in, let it level itself out before you add any more because you don't want to add too much. You can fill this up very, very quickly because there's it's not a lot of space between those walls of that silicone mold. Attempting to go in there with a heat gun, but All right, now it's time to get these pictures in here. Now, I am using some of my Rolio Super Sparkle. It's the pearl white, just to add a little bit of shimmer to this. And this is the part that's going to be tricky because I want the clear layer only on that part of silicone that you can see right there. I don't want it to leak over into where that maroon or the burgundy is at all. I just need it to stay on here, but I need it to be completely covered because I don't want the black when I pour that on next to seep up into these pictures and hide them or anything like that. Like, I want this to be a clear layer here without it going into the rest of it because I don't want a clear layer down if I can avoid it. So what I'm doing is I put a thin layer of resin down on the mold first, spread it out, hit it with the heat gun just to pop any bubbles that may be there. I am also going over the front part of my paper with resin first to kind of help hopefully reduce any air bubbles getting trapped in between. And I am smoothing it down to make sure that there's no air bubbles trapped under there. Pushing it around, just doing whatever I can, and then I am taking the resin and kind of going over the backside of the paper as well. And then we're just going to do the same thing for the other two. Now, I know, and I knew beforehand, that these aren't all going to fit in here, without having to cut them. Ideally, if you're going to cut something, you should probably do that before you seal it with Mod Podge or whatever, because I cut it now and there's no sealing on the edge of the paper where I'm cutting it. Do you understand? So if I cut it, that resin can very easily seep up into my paper and, just kind of make the color go wonky. And that's not what I want. I do end up having to trim off a little bit on the corners, but it's hanging over, so hopefully fingers crossed we won't have an issue with it later on. But I mean, we'll see. So ideally you want to have it set up and cut down before you start fooling with resin, before you seal it. This way you can make sure those edges are sealed in there, before you get the resin in there. Now I am taking my time. This did take me a hot minute just to kind of work that all out, make sure that there's no air bubbles, kind of position the pieces of paper and how I feel like they would look best, because I know that they're going to have to overlap. I know that they're going to have to hang off. I want to try and make it as central as possible with that middle one so it doesn't look odd, and not lose the images on the other two, if that makes sense. And also make sure that the resin is going to hit all of that middle area with just a clear resin, because I just, that's one thing I need to have happen. I need to have it there. Now, some of the resin obviously started going over into the burgundy part. So what I'm doing is I decided that it would be best to kind of just spread it out over the burgundy. I didn't use a whole lot of resin, but I thought that if I did it this way, then I'd be less likely, because it would level itself out. And since there's not a lot, there wouldn't be a thick layer. And I'd be less likely to have big lumps and bumps of clear resin that, when I go to put the black on, are going to show through and make it look dumb. Now, as I pointed out just a second ago, the two corners here, when the resin cured, it pulled in towards the center and I didn't have enough on there. So to avoid having to wait an entire another day, I decided that I was just going to take a little bit of the Istoyo UV resin and just cover these areas. Now, I didn't want to do the black on top because I feel like it would look really weird and I didn't want that. So I just need this little bit of clear on here just to kind of go along with the rest of it to make it look cohesive and not stupid before I put the black and cover all of this up. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to hit it with the heat gun, make sure there's no bubbles, cross my fingers, hope for the best. Now, the one thing that, again, hindsight, that I should have done, and I really didn't think it would make that much of a difference, but when I demolded it, it really does, is I should have just taken a little bit of that Rolio Pearl White and added it to it, because it was missing it. Like, that stuff goes a long, long way, and you could tell the difference. Like, so I'll show you how I fixed that here in a little bit. Now we're just gonna go with the HTV Ront black pigment paste, add that into my resin as this is curing, and we're gonna finish off this bad boy and hope for the best. So the reason that I chose to do a pigment paste instead of a black mica is I want the burgundy and the clear that I put on top to really have an impact. And, mica is great and everything, but I kind of wanted just that beautiful, just glossy, straight black look, that kind of like classic look without the effects of the mica powder. I want it to be a solid block color, no swirlies, no shimmer to this at all, just that straight glossy black. And I think that it adds something to it that is just going to make it just a wow factor, So I'm going to let this other little part cure. And now it's about done. And I am checking it and kind of pushing on it to see if I can see any resin moving around underneath. I don't, so I feel like it's cured enough. So we'll cross our fingers and hope for the best on that one. Now I am very, very, very slowly pouring this resin in here. And the reason I'm doing it so slow is because I do have these edges of the paper that's hanging up underneath, or hanging over that middle part of the tray, and I want to make sure that the resin kind of just finds its way and flows and kind of just does its thing without catching any air bubbles under there. I will go under and kind of check it with my tool later on, but I feel like this is the best way. If you do it too fast, then the likelihood for, bubbles getting trapped under there are a lot higher. And I really, really don't want that to happen, like at all, at all. And it is worth taking your time to do stuff like this. Like, I know I'm super impatient when it comes to certain things and whatever, but it's worth it just for that little bit of extra. All right, so I'm just filling this up the rest of the way. Then I'm going to hit it with my heat gun, and I'm going to go around the edges and just kind of make sure that, everything is good and there's no trapped bubbles down there. I honestly should have done that part before I filled it up completely with my resin, because it was kind of like going up over the edges a little bit, and yeah, I was worried because I had to go like really, really slow, and just doing it, I was worried it was just going to spill everywhere. So yeah, ideally I should have just not quite filled it up. Okay, now it's time for this. Now, this bottom part, again, I'm going in really slow because it does fill up fast, and I want to make sure that there's not going to be any air bubbles that get trapped in here. And on these type of molds, if you pour it too fast, because it does take a little while for the resin to kind of flow down the sides, the only thing that's going to happen is it's going to come up and over the outside of your mold, and you're going to waste resin and have a huge mess to clean. And I know this because I've done it before, so take your time and do it slow. Now, I did notice that on this, it seemed like as I poured the resin in, the mold was kind of bowing out a little bit. So I think that it was just like mainly two sides that it was doing it on. So I just got my silicone mixing stick and kind of popped it up against the side of it to hopefully hold that in. Hindsight again, I should have found a better way to do it, and you'll see why when I go to demold. And then I am just taking my silicone tool and just kind of hitting the sides a little bit just to make sure that there's no air bubbles there. All right, now it's time for the top of this, and of course I don't have enough resin, so I am going to have to mix up a little bit more, but that's fine. All right, so now we're going to fill this up. Now, once I get to the top, I am going to kind of go slow and make sure, because of the way that the mold is shaped, it's got those little pointy things on the side. I want to make sure that there's no air bubbles in there. So I am squeezing each side to make sure if there is any air trapped in there, it'll push it out and refill it back with resin. Hit it with my heat gun, and then I'm going to top it off. And we're going to wait and keep our fingers crossed that everything turns out the right way and that I don't have any issues. But yeah, we'll see. Hit it one last time with a heat gun and let these babies cure. And here we are 24 hours later. Time to demold. Now, this is where my silicone mixing stick was, and you can see it kind of dented it in. So yeah, I should have found a different way to do it. Maybe something probably a little bit wider and flatter would have done it fine. And now it's time to demold. Now, I've not used this mold before, so, first time doing it is always a little tricky. And I'm going to go in here with a little bit of alcohol and just kind of put that in there to break that seal between the resin and the silicone. And honestly, I mean, after I do that, this thing pops out like super, super easy. I just kind of massaged it around a little bit and out it pops. And let's see what we got. It was a little bit more tricky, putting the mold back the right way. All right, let's see. Oh, it's gorgeous. I like it. Like, it's really, really pretty. I like it a lot. I mean, aside from that stupid little area that it's kind of concaved in a little bit from my mixing stick, I think it looks super, super pretty. All right, let's see what we got for the lid. Now, this one, to actually unmold the actual like lid part itself was really, really easy. I mean, I had no troubles with that whatsoever. Now, taking that little knobby thing out was a little bit more difficult, and I did struggle with it for a little bit. And it's mainly because the way that the silicone is on this mold, in that area, like right before you get to the wider part of the little knobby thing, um, it it's really, really stiff. And I was worried that I was either going to like break off the knob or it was just going to tear my mold. Like I kind of worried about it a little bit. And then it's so like in there that I had to try and get my hand in there, and I was able to kind of spray a little bit of alcohol in there and move it around. And then it finally did just kind of, just if you squeeze the top of it, it kind of like spit it out after I got the alcohol in there. So it was tricky, but it's definitely doable, that's for sure. It just took a little bit longer to kind of figure out the best way to get it out. And really, I mean, it wasn't too horrible. It's just a matter of, figuring things out sometimes when you have these molds that have like these extra little bits and bobs on them. Definitely not as hard as a candle mold, I'll tell you what. I tried one of those like the tall what are they called? Not votive. Is it a votive? No. No, the tall like skinny stick candles, those kind of candle holders. Oh, terrible. All right, so it turns out really, really pretty. Now, the one issue is, and I don't know what I did wrong, if I had to have poured too much resin in it, it has to be it, because it didn't sit all the way down on there. I don't think it's the way the mold is. I think it's that I just poured the resin up too high, because as I shave it down a little bit, it I can get it to set down where it's supposed to on 3 of the 4 sides. That fourth one, I just couldn't, I mean, maybe if I continue working with it, it might go down the rest of the way. It's not super crazy noticeable, like from afar, but if you're looking at it, you can tell that it doesn't sit right. Again, something that you learn when you're dealing with new molds is how far to fill them, because you never really can tell. But I do like it. Like I'm showing you, you can see that sets, that sets, and then this one, there's just that little bit, like a millimeter, where it just doesn't sit right. So now I'm just going to clean off the bottom of this from the sharp edges with my deburring tool real quick, and then we're going to be done with this and unmold this tray, which I'm super excited about. I can't wait to see it. I really can't. Like, oh, I can't wait. Come on, hurry up. I want to see it. All right, let's do this. All right, so I do have little bits and pieces of resin that are on here. They're on the mold, on the edge of the mold from where I poured that clear layer very first, and I really didn't think that it was going to make a difference, but of course, I had poured the resin up so high that it attached itself onto it. So now I just got to pick these bits and pieces off, and then we can see what we've got. And I can't wait. Wish you would hurry up. Please hurry up. I'm almost done, I think. Oh my god, come on. All right. Are you guys ready? Are you ready for this? All right, and it's at this point where I stick my hand in there and I feel something sticky. So, yay, my UV resin didn't cure the whole way like I thought it did. But look at this. Look how beautiful that is. Do you see all that super sparkle from that Rolio mica powder? Like, that's gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. But here is where you can tell that where I put that UV resin, even though I thought that it had cured because I couldn't see any movement, I should have done it from underneath the mold. That's on me. And then if I would have done it that way and tried to cure it, it probably wouldn't have gotten the indentations on it that it did from me sticking my fingers in there, not knowing that it was done and all of that. But you see all the sparkle in there from that pearl white. Those 2 areas don't have any. And I really didn't think that it would add that much sparkle to it, that it would make that much of a difference when I didn't put it in there. But it truly does. So we're going to fix that here in a minute. But first, I decided that I just want to edge this out a little bit with copper. So I'm just taking my copper paint pen and I am going over just the tiniest hint of copper on the outside of this tray. I mean, just the smallest line, and you can barely see it on video, but it just makes that one little detail makes such a difference. And I'm going to do this to the jar and the lid as well, just to make them all go together. But I am super happy with the way that my papers turned out in there. Like taking that time to sit there and fool around with it and work that resin and work the paper into the resin really pays off. I literally got one little air pocket in, I think it's the middle one, that needs to be fixed. It could have been so much worse. So when you're adding stuff like this in there, it is worth it to take, a few extra minutes to really work it in well. Take your time to do it because it makes all the difference in the world later on. Like, did I have to fix that one little thing? I could have probably just literally put a dot of UV resin in that tiny little hole that I got and cured it and it would have been done. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a top coat over the whole thing, just a very thin one, just because of the fact that I screwed up the UV resin part by not curing it the right way. And I just want to get rid of all of that and all the lumps and bumps and stuff because this tray is so gorgeous. I don't want anything in there to ruin it. So I'm not going to worry about doing it that way. I'm just going to make sure that I get the resin in that little hole when I put the top coat on. And then because the resin is so sticky, we're going to be able to attach some of that Rolio mica powder on there too to kind of make those parts shine as well. So it'll just be perfect. So I'm just adding the finishing touches on this lid, and I mean it just adds a little bit to it. It's nothing overpowering, it's just a little bit. Sometimes it's the little things that make such a big difference. And you can see the one little hole that I'm pointing out to you right there is the only real hole that I got. And then, the issues with where the UV resin didn't cure fully because I didn't do it underneath through the mold like I should have. But that's it. That's it. So we're just going to go with a little bit. I just mixed up 60 mils of the Istoyo resin. And I'm just going to take a tiniest bit of this mica powder. And I'm going to put it on those areas where that UV resin is still a little bit tacky. Because then it'll stick to it. Because I don't need it all over the whole thing. Like, I just don't. There's enough sparkle on it that I don't want to overdo it by adding more. So I'm just going to put it on there. I tapped it in with my finger a little bit, and then I'm just going to add a tiny bit of resin to it, and I'm going to kind of work it around a little bit more with my silicone tool just to make sure that that area has the super sparkle as well. And then what I'm going to do is where that little hole is, I'm going to take I start off first with the silicone tool, but the dotting tool works better. And I'm just going to kind of work the resin in there until I can no longer see that hole. And then it's fine. It's gone. We don't have to worry about it at all. Like, the resin will do its thing and it'll just be perfect when we go to take our glamour shots tomorrow. So all in all, now I do take a little bit of time and make sure that there's like nothing that I'm missing. Hit it with my heat gun to pop any bubbles and just smooth this out from edge to edge, corner to corner, taking my time here so that I don't have any issues whatsoever and I get a perfect top coat on here. Now, I don't want to do a whole lot of resin. This tray actually is one that has like a pretty decent depth to it, which is really nice. And I don't want to fill that up. I just need enough resin so that when it cures, it's not going to, pull back into the middle like I've had an issue with here lately, and I'm going to have holes and lumps, and it's just, no. I don't want that, so enough that I know it's going to cover it, but not too much that I'm going to lose the depth of this tray. And that's it. Now we just wait and see how this top coat turns out, and we're done. And then it'll be time for the glamour shots. All in all, I am absolutely in love with how this tray and this jar turned out. And I hope you guys are too. Like, I think it's gorgeous. I do think it would have looked really pretty if I had kind of like a plummy type purple on there as well. But I am happy with the overall color choices that I picked. All right, so 24 hours later, this top coat has cured beautifully. That hole is gone. I've got that super sparkle in those areas where the UV resin just didn't have it. And I'm in love, guys. Anyway, that's a wrap on this one. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. I will catch you guys on Tuesday and the next one. Love ya. Bye.